I acknowledge that today we are gathered here, we are speaking, we are standing for the rights of Palestinians on stolen land. I pay my respect to its true owners, the elders past and present. As with the Palestinians, sovereignty was never ceded and treaties have never been signed. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
And there's one thing you take away from today, I want you to take this away. That the fight for Indigenous rights here is the fight for Palestinian rights there, is the fight for Indigenous rights and rights of every oppressed person all over this great earth. Because Palestine won't be free if our Indigenous brothers and sisters here aren't free. Palestine won't be free if our Rohingyas, our Uyghurs, our West Papuans, our queer folk, if everyone's not free. We are all free when we are all free.
As I stand here, I can see the Aboriginal flag, and that's proof enough that we are on the side of justice and peace and truth. For indeed the struggles are intertwined. You don't have to be Palestinian to stand up for Palestine. You don't have to be a refugee to stand up for refugee rights. You don't have to be a woman to stand up for women's rights. You don't have to be black to say Black Lives Matter. You don't have to be Indigenous to stand up and speak for Indigenous brothers and sisters. An injustice on one of us is an injustice on all of us.
End the siege! End the siege!
Mutual, mutual, this is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
What we are witnessing is the exposure of lies, that colonisation is neither benevolent or non-violent.
To understand the resistance would be to understand settler colonialism, for which mainstream media is intimately entwined with the state in this country.
Everything we do here, everything we do is really bad.
Our liberation will never be found in states, in governments, in courts, but it will be found in each other.
You're listening to the Justice for Palestine podcast.
This podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Jagera and Turrbal people by the Radio Reversal Collective.
In this podcast, we're aiming to create a living archive of the movement for Palestinian liberation in this city.
This is a series built out of the urgent need to respond to this political moment.
Don't expect slick production or finely crafted narratives. This is the sound of a movement in progress.
This is an archive of a local resistance movement, a collective struggle grounded in this settler colonial city, aiming at nothing short of liberation for all Indigenous people everywhere.
For all oppressed peoples everywhere.
For everyone struggling against coercion, incarceration, exploitation, and occupation.
If you haven't heard the first 3 episodes yet, we've basically been trying to sketch out some of the key claims and concerns that are shaping the movement for justice for Palestine in this city. This is part of a broader practice of learning from the struggles taking root in this moment and taking up our responsibility, as Palestinian journalist Ramzi Baroud put it in episode 3, to be intellectually engaged in these movements and to take seriously the lessons they offer us. In this episode, we're picking up where we left off last episode, with the power and importance of blackfellow Palestinian solidarity.
We're finding lines of connection between the struggle for Palestine and other ongoing struggles against settler colonialism, racial capitalism, and heteropatriarchy across the world.
As we've been listening back to speeches from rallies and public meetings, to interviews and discussions we've recorded over the past 5 months, we've found this rich archive of accounts that illuminate the intersections of genocidal global systems and the really different ways that they're taking shape in this moment. But more than just descriptions of violence and repression, we've found constant reminders of both long-standing and emergent solidarities that have been deepening in the Justice for Palestine movement. So first up, you're going to hear some recordings from the Invasion Day rally held here in Magandjin on the 26th of January, the day that marks the beginning of colonial invasion on this continent. This is Turrbal and South Sea Islander academic and writer Dr. Amy McQuire, who has long been standing in solidarity with Palestinian people.
Today is a day that Australia wants us to forget. They want to force an amnesia onto us so they can celebrate carefree, so they don't have to think about the bloody origins of what happened in this place that we're standing from today. I come from Rockhampton, Turrbal country in central Queensland, which was a killing field on the frontier. They want us to forget that because the remnants of colonialism are still here. Settler colonialism does not end, it transforms and attempts to make itself invisible. We see settler colonialism in the jails, in the child jails. Queensland locks up more Aboriginal children than anywhere else in the country. We see it in the violence inflicted upon our women. The police are here to criminalise our women, but when they die by violence, they are suddenly absent and Aboriginal women are disappeared again. They want us to forget because they don't want to acknowledge every person here today who stands not for forgetting but for remembering, who stands as a force of resistance. And they don't want us to connect the dots to what is currently happening over in Palestine. This invasion day here is our Nakba. 75 years ago, Palestinians, Indigenous peoples to that area, were forcibly displaced, murdered and massacred. And they want us to forget that. They want us to wash that away. They want to paint Palestinian resistance as violence. Back there 75 years ago, Palestinians did not just lie down and give their land away. They resisted as well, and they have resisted for 75 years. And that is what we are seeing in Gaza today. They want us to forget that. They don't want us to draw the links to Nakba, to Gaza, to Jagera country right here, to Gadigal country, to country all across. They don't want us to think about that. But that is why we are standing here strong and proud as Indigenous peoples. We remember the resistance. We remember our resistance warriors, Dundali, Yagan, Pemulwuy, Barangaroo. They don't want us to remember that. But here today, we remember that, and we remember the fighters of the Palestinian resistance. We say down with the Australian racist settler colonialism regime. We say down with the Israel Zionist regime. You do not want to be on the wrong side of history. You don't want to stand with a regime that is currently massacring innocent children in their tens of thousands, who are disappearing them under the rubble, who are killing the proud women who are the bringers of life in Palestine, who are killing the men who are there grabbing the body, rescuing the bodies from the rubble, who are there in the hospitals, who are not leaving. They want us to forget, and they want us to think that these people are the enemy. They're not the enemy. What Palestine has shown us is that there is a collective Indigenous resistance, and we are not free until all of us are free. We are not free until we are free here. We are not free until the Palestinians are free, and they will return. They will return to their homelands. We are not free until the Indigenous West Papuans are free. We are not free until the Kanaki of New Caledonia are free. We are not free until the native populations of Turtle Island are free. We are not free until all of the Indigenous peoples in the world are free. That is what we remember here today. That is what we march for. And we will say we will never forget. We will honour the resistance.
You should know his name. He was a poet, he was an academic, and he was a staunch fighter for Palestinian freedom. About a couple of months ago now, his apartment, where he was in hiding, trying to protect himself and many extended members of his family, was struck by drone strike. Not an accident, very deliberate and demonstrably, in the face of it, coordinated. None of us are safe and free if a poet and academic can be killed by drone strike. No one in the world is safe. I'd like to dedicate this poem to his memory and his family. It is called If I Must Die, Let It Be a Tale, a reference to one of his final poems. This is the tale of a poet's vow, that as soldiers stormed his table where he dared to write, live and love his family, he would throw his pen in their faces. So in death as in life. If Rifat must die and we must live, we are all Palestinian, and all country is Palestine. Each feather, each stone, wet with tears, headwater of memory and truth. And speaking of truth, if Rifat must die and we must live, let us all start again at childhood. Children who grow up to be poets, who teach their children to be poets, poets who throw their pens at soldiers. If Rifat must die and we must live and fly the kite of peace, make of us a wind that carries aloft white kite and rights alike, and the will of humanity, and food and water and shoes and bandages and ribbons for ponytails and handmade wands for bubbles. Let us be strong enough to carry them all. And speaking of treaties, if Rifat must die and we must live, let the pen he cast be the one to write it. Let soldiers' hands be the ones to sign it, and let our hands be the ones to carry it to the shore, fashion it a paper boat and float it westward, where battleships are no more, to tell the tale of Rifat al-Arir.
That was the incredible poet and writer Cheryl Levy, also speaking at the Invasion Day rally this year. Ngunnawal writer and artist Ethan Enoch also used poetry to express his solidarity for Palestine at a much earlier rally in November last year outside the office of Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers. This is what he had to say.
I wrote a rap recently talking about what's happening in Palestine, but also all the colonizers of the world, all around the world, that cause genocide and ethnic cleansing. So thank you. I hope you take something from it. Feels like I'm lost on a lonely road. This whole world's gonna burn, still nobody knows. My feet crunch on the bones, you're supposed to be grown. You're supposed to fight for the weak, not throw on your stones. If it came to you, governments bombing your homes, you would ditch all politics, lock it and load, pop in the domes, Molotovs drop and explode, ready to die for the love that you know. Or maybe you won't. Turn on the TV, sit and just watch, letting it waste away. Judgment Day hitting the clock. You only care about who is or isn't a boss. It doesn't matter if your leaders are the ones that are lost. Living lavish, but it came at a cost. Still contribute to the game because you paid for your spot. Meanwhile, bullets fly and it came from a cop. And they ain't even got to aim because everybody's taking the shot. My heart's kicking at the door till it's breaking the lock. Ready for action. All of the debating is washed, trying to be tamed while the government's creating a plot. I stand strong for the mob. You can't fake what I got. The earth shakes every time that I'm laying to rest. I wake up and see another family dead. Yet another child crying that he has to be fed. So today, I don't feel like back in my ends. The PM sells gats to a Zionist trend. Your tax money gives guns out to violent men. And like a bullet, my words sink inside of your head. You might as well have been the one to pull the trigger instead, because that's where the change goes when a dollar is spent, getting money from the banks to protect the interests. This is apartheid, colonization again. Ask Australia to check what the recipe says. Thank you very much. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! From the river to the sea.
The recognition that the struggle for Indigenous liberation on this continent is directly connected to Palestinian liberation has been front and centre in this movement. Magandjin and South Sea Islander Professor Chelsea Watergo, speaking all the way back in November 2023 at a rally focused on the targeting of health workers and the health system in Palestine, explains the shared questions facing Palestinians and First Nations people on this continent.
How to live in a social world that wishes you dead, in a society that's structured upon your non-existence. One has to ask, how is a humanitarian pause possible when there is a steadfast refusal to see the Palestinian people as human? We see this in the cold-hearted indifference to the daily death counts. But we also see this in the erasure of Palestinian men who are excluded in the telling of Palestinian deaths, which counts only women, children and babies, as though the lives and deaths of Palestinian men don't count. So I want to speak to the lives and deaths of Palestinian men in this moment, who, like Aboriginal men in this place, are routinely denied the category of human in life and whose lives are deemed ungrievable in death. And it's the words of a martyred Palestinian man and medical doctor that I want to speak of, whose life and death models a humanity so desperately needed in this moment. I want to acknowledge Dr. Haman Alo, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike that targeted his family home near Al-Shifa Hospital. In his last media interview, he was asked why he didn't evacuate to the south of Gaza. He replied, "And if I go, who treats my patients? We are not animals. We have the right to receive proper health care. You think I went to medical school and for my postgraduate degrees for a total of 14 years, so I think only about my life and not my patients? I'm asking you, you think this is the reason I went to med school, to think only about my life? This is not the reason I became a doctor. Dr. Olo was on the front line in every sense of the word, and his life and his death should be remembered, not only in the counting of the dead, but as a reminder of what counts in this moment. He died not fighting, but caring for those deemed least deserving of care. When he said, "We are not animals," I heard that as a black fella. And I'm reminded of the words of Winston Churchill, who claimed in 1937 that the Palestinian people, Native American people and Aboriginal people were nothing more than dogs in a manger. Dehumanising us all to deny our sovereign rights and justifying the violence of settler colonial occupation. And it's this dehumanisation that is the heart of this health crisis, which is more than the over 10,000 deaths in this moment, but the hundreds of thousands martyred since 1948 and the millions of displaced Palestinians. The only end to this is not a humanitarian pause, but the end of settler colonial occupation. From the river to the sea.
I think it's the shared sovereignty that Chelsea was talking about. Like, that's, I think, really what grounds that Indigenous Palestinian solidarity, and something that it's been there. Like, there's been staunch solidarity, Indigenous Palestinian solidarity for decades. But I do think right now it's there's been a real, like, huge resurgence in it, and it's incredibly amazing, incredibly powerful, and just learning from each other's struggles. Like, I've learnt so much from you two and from so many other people. I think it gives us so much power, and it's crucial as well, because what we're fighting is a global structure. Like, settler colonialism is a global structure, and we're seeing that really clearly right now too. Like, you're seeing there's a blatant genocide and ethnic cleansing that Israel are committing against Palestinians right now. And, you see all the settler colonies just rallying straight behind that. And you can even see that, like, they know the contradictions as well. Like, they're becoming really clear. But because it's a global structure, we have to resist that structure at every single node that it rears its ugly head. Like, we have to smash that shit wherever we see it. And so we know where we belong, we know who we are, and from that we're building, like, an incredibly powerful movement.
And I think, it's so powerful because, as black fellas, we understand what is happening. One, because, we're distant relatives in this struggle against oppression, but then also knowing who we are and where we belong to as well. And I think that's one of the greatest things that we have, as Indigenous folks. And that's, like, the greatest thing that, colonial empires destroy is that connection. I believe the greatest tool to dismantle and destroy, colonialism is Indigenous knowledge. And, black fellas here, and for me, like, we may call it solidarity, we may call it, taking the ball up, but it's love. It's love because in our veins we've spilled blood in this country, fighting to be free, knowing what it feels like to have our kids being taken away, have our kids being, decimated, and have our people been destroyed for the mere fact that we wanted to exist. It's not that I want to take your struggle up. It's more so that, I feel what you go through. We live in a place that is still occupied by force. Whether you call that, the Queensland police force or the Australian military, these groups enter Aboriginal communities unwanted and occupy them. But it's also because you shouldn't have to feel that way here. Don't feel oppressed because, you're in one, you've been taken away from home. You shouldn't have to feel the pain that we feel in this country. Let us take that from you. That's why we say we stand in solidarity, because it's our responsibility as black fellas, one, to pull up people, but then also to bring them home. And when we bring them home, we sit down and we love them, and, it's what we do, bro. And like, not just for your community, but every community that's ever come to Australia. I guarantee you, if you've been in a marginalised community, you've sat at the table of black fellas and we've had the conversation of where you come from and why you're here. Most communities forget about us and they keep going up, but then there's some communities who don't and who can't because of the colour of their skin and what they look like. And so while we're here, let's keep doing that.
You know, as Brother Jamal was just saying, like, there's that global colonisation that we need to smash, and all these colonial states uphold each other. Now, you know, we don't need to just be in solidarity with Palestine. We need to it needs to have a material aspect to it as well. Realistically, to some extent, Palestine can never be liberated so long as these other colonial states exist, because these other colonial states uphold Israel. You know, perfect example, Australia. You know, everyone looks at America as this massive, big, imperialist monster across the world that's upholding all these occupations. Most people look past Australia. Australia, though, has such an important role in all of these colonial occupations, and these colonial occupations wouldn't have the power they have and wouldn't be able to exist as they do without Australia. Now, I'll give you an example. Everyone's heard of the Iron Dome defence system over in Israel, right? How many people in the crowd here tonight know that that Iron Dome defence system, the logistics for that, are run out of Pine Gap in Northern Territory? All of those drone strikes that happen throughout the Middle East, same thing. They're coordinated out of Pine Gap, right here in Australia. So long as we've got military bases like Pine Gap, the second most important military installation in the world, as long as we have installations like that on Australian soil, waging war on Gaza, you know, the Palestinians can never actually be truly liberated. They can never truly overthrow Israel so long as it continues to have that support from other colonial states across the world. You know, we're sending so much arms and weapons to Israel right now. This year alone, I think there's been something like 55 shipments of arms to Israel. Just in this year, 55 shipments. That's more than one a week. They're all bullets that are going to go murder innocent children over in Gaza. And they're coming from here in Australia. Australia is waging war on Gaza as much as Israel is, and West Papua, and all of these other colonial occupations that exist across the world. And until we smash states like Australia and America, we won't have a good chance at being able to liberate the oppressed people throughout the world from their own colonisation.
That was Dr. Jamal Nabulsi, Gamilaroi Kumar podcaster, activist and parent Bo Spearham, and UN person and president of the Black People's Union, Kieran Stewart Asserton, speaking at an event called Abolish Racism in November 2023. In the excerpts you've heard already in this episode, it's incredibly clear that the solidarity and presence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as organisers, academics, activists, artists and supporters cannot be overstated. And this solidarity is connected to a longer and broader history of anti-colonial, anti-capitalist and anti-racist organising that stretches across the globe. This is activist and filmmaker, Birrigubba and Wangirabara person Sam Waripa-Watson, speaking outside the office of Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers in February 2024.
I will always take any opportunity that I can to speak up for Palestine and to state my support as an Aboriginal person, and to state that as Aboriginal people, we stand with Palestine because it's the same struggle. It is the same struggle against land theft and colonial occupation and a denial of self-determination. You know, we face death at the hands of the state where no one is ever held accountable. In the last 30 years, there have been over 500 Aboriginal people killed in police and prison custody, and no one has ever been convicted. And when I see that, it makes me think of all the people in Gaza who have been murdered in hospitals and homes and schools. They've had bombs dropped on them. And it doesn't seem like anyone is being held accountable. If the world can watch Palestinians be pushed from the north of the Gaza Strip to Rafah and then cornered and bombed and expelled from their lands, if the world can watch and no one tries to stop it, then what hope is there for me to get my land back? I've been pushed off my land already, and if we can watch other people be pushed off theirs, how the hell will I ever get mine back? I absolutely believe that if Palestine is still occupied and if the rights of Palestinians are still denied, then my people can never have their rights. So I fight with Palestine because it is my fight, not because it's similar or because, we understand how they feel, but because it's one fight. It is one fight against global colonialism and capitalism, and we must fight it all together until it is taken by the root from every corner of the earth.
As Sam describes, the work of liberating Palestine is global. For Palestine to be free, everyone must be free. This is Palestinian organiser and president of the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, Nasser Mashni, putting it in clear terms at a rally on Yugumbeh country, in what's now termed the Gold Coast, in January 2024.
I'd like to acknowledge that we are here, we're standing on stolen land. And if there's one thing you take away from today, I want you to take this away. That the fight for Indigenous rights here is the fight for Palestinian rights there, is the fight for Indigenous rights and rights of every oppressed person all over this great earth. Because Palestine won't be free if our Indigenous brothers and sisters here aren't free. Palestine won't be free if our Rohingyas, our Uyghurs, our West Papuans, our queer folk, if everyone's not free. We are all free when we are all free. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal, and you should never acknowledge traditional owners. To acknowledge a traditional owner is to suggest that it's a past tense. They always were and always will be the owners, as Palestine always will be and always will be Palestinian. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge the great Yemeni people before we do anything else. When our Prime Minister finally got out and condemned, he didn't condemn the slaughter in Palestine. He didn't condemn the 4% of the population. 4% of the population in Gaza that is dead or maimed. To give you some idea, that's 1 million Australians. Yeah? 4%. He didn't condemn that. He condemned the fact that shipping containers couldn't get through the Red Sea. Shame. And the poorest country on earth did its job as a signatory to the ICJ to stop a genocide. They've not hurt anyone. They've not killed anyone. They've just said there'll be no arms going to Israel on our watch. There is honour in stopping the killing. There is honour in participating in the blockade. There is honour in boycotting, divesting and sanctioning the apartheid state. And we won't forget, Albo. We're not going to forget. Are you going to forget? No! Don't you dare. I want to read a couple of lines from a Lutheran preacher, Dr. Mundar Isaac at Bethlehem, just before Christmas. He said, "We, the Palestinians, will recover, we will rise, we will stand up again from the midst of destruction, as we have always done as Palestinians. But for those who are complicit, I feel sorry for you. We will recover. Will you ever recover? Your charity and your words of shock after the genocide won't make a difference. And let me say it, we will not accept your apology after you realise it was a genocide. What has been done, and it happened on your watch with the impunity you afforded apartheid Israel. Shame. I want to thank each and every one of you. It's been 90 odd days. We're fast approaching the 100th day. 100 days of death, destruction, silence. Silence from a compliant Western mainstream media, but not silence from you. Yesterday, 5 million Yemenis got out in the street after they were bombed. 5 million. There's no silence there. The global south is aware. The world is on trial. The International Court of Justice, those judges think they're presiding over a case. No, you're on trial. We know it's a genocide. We want to know whether you care about your next cushy job or you're going to tell the truth about what's happening and stop the killing. Gaza might be on one knee, but it is unbroken and unbreakable. The Indigenous spirit, Indigenous people, their connection to the land is a connection that is rooted in the soil, in the generations of their forefathers that are buried there. Indigenous people don't bomb land. Indigenous people toil land. You don't bomb land that is yours. You bomb land that you want to steal.
Over the past few months of struggle here in Magandjin, these lines of solidarity and connection between global struggles against injustice and dispossession have been increasingly illuminated. This is writer, activist and Greens candidate Jonathan Sriranganathan talking a bit about the connections that he sees between the struggle for Palestinian liberation and his own family's struggle as Elam Tamils, and what those connections lay bare about the transnational circuits of weapons, of racism, of all of the technologies of incarceration, repression, surveillance, detention, as they take root in all of the places that European imperialism reshaped.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! My name is Jonathan Sriranganathan. I'm the Greens candidate for Mayor of Brisbane, and I'm proud to stand here today in solidarity with the Palestinian people. I acknowledge the rightful First Nations owners of this land, and I recognise that Palestinian calls for freedom and justice force us to confront our own complicity in the settler colonial project on this continent, and that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also want to recognise the solidarities and connections between oppressed peoples right across the globe. We know that what is happening in Palestine is not new and is not isolated. Whether it's what's happening in West Papua, whether it's what's happening to the people of Tibet, whether it's what's happening to the Rohingya, to the people of the Congo, all of these struggles are connected, and we must understand those struggles, and we must celebrate solidarity in all its forms. And I welcome the allies here today from all across the world. My father's people are Tamil from northern Sri Lanka, and without giving you a long history lesson, there are some very strong similarities between the experiences of the Tamil people and what's happening right now in Palestine. Some people don't know that Israel was a major supporter of the Sri Lankan government when they committed genocide against the Tamils. Israel even sold fighter jets and bombers to the Sri Lankan government, and the pattern is shockingly similar. Tamil villages were bombed and attacked using the justification that they were harbouring terrorists. Tamils were herded across the island in their hundreds of thousands. Hospitals were bombed, schools were bombed. They were told to go to safe zones. The safe zones were bombed. Eventually they were herded into a so-called no-fire zone on the east coast. And in the space of a couple of months, somewhere between 40,000 and 70,000 Tamil civilians were massacred. And the whole time, the only thing the Australian government did was to provide more surveillance support to the Sri Lankan government and turn back boatloads of Tamil refugees who were trying to flee the conflict. And I share this to highlight that all these struggles are connected, but that our government has been complicit in settler colonialism long before this particular instance of violence and genocide. And we need to understand those connections. We need to talk about those connections. We need to highlight that this is not an isolated struggle, but that all these struggles are connected. And whether you call it capitalism or colonialism or imperialism, this entire broken system must be transformed if we are to have a free Palestine.
One of the things that comes up again and again in these accounts is that understanding the global transnational systems that are enabling genocide in Gaza is crucial because it helps us connect up seemingly distinct struggles against white supremacy, colonisation and racial violence, and the repressive carceral systems that maintain them. This point was made in December 2023 at a rally organised by refugees outside the office of Federal Labor MP Annika Wells, which aimed to draw attention to the ongoing detention, incarceration, surveillance, repression, torture and neglect of refugees in this country, many of whom have been dispossessed from their homelands by the same forces that are shaping the atrocities unfolding in Gaza. This is Afghan organiser and academic Dr. Mujib Abid.
We are not just numbers, we are not just faceless beings in this country. We are very much alive, very much people with experiences, people with feelings. And those feelings are being hurt by what's being done systematically, by the oppression, by the isolation that our people feel as a result of the border regime in this country. Look, I talk to Afghans all the time, families who are languishing because they have been separated from their families, and there is no pathway, there is no promise of reunion, not in the next year, not in the next 2 to 3 years. And some of them are, unfortunately, it's so bad that they're resigned to a fate of waiting for up to 10 years, and then hopefully there's a promise down the line. That is cruel. That shouldn't be acceptable in a society like ours. Of course, the problem is, whatever happens here is not disconnected from whatever happens there, right? So the very forces that displaces people like us, that forces us to choose the path of exile, the path of migration, forced migration, I should say, those very forces are then leading to or informing and are very much the causes for the sorts of decisions that have been made in this country in relation to asylum seekers and refugees, cruel as they are, inhumane as they are, but can be sustained. For 2 decades, we're seeing certain heartless policies enacted in this country, and it's just simply put, it's wrong. It's a bad stain on the values that the leaders of this country time and again claim that they uphold.
So there are direct connections between what's going on here in Australia, what's going on for Tamil people or Afghan people, and what's happening in Palestine at the moment. These struggles are all deeply connected, and they are all a function of Western imperialism. For hundreds of years, Britain and other colonial powers expanded across the globe, drew lines on maps, turned people against each other, made profit from stealing other people's land and resources and labour, and then created a situation of ongoing war and displacement. And so in that context, where the Australian government and the Australian nation state has benefited from colonialism, has directly supported regimes in different parts of the world that have displaced people and caused immense suffering, I think it's really important that we highlight the complicity and the connections between those different struggles.
That was Jonathan Sriranganathan again, drawing those connections between the global systems of colonisation and racial violence and the ongoing atrocities in Gaza. Importantly, as diaspora Arab writer, youth worker and activist Lamis Hamouda reminds us, understanding these connections isn't just about getting the most correct explanation for what's going on in Gaza, but is about learning to build meaningful movements of solidarity that can uproot colonial occupation and racial violence everywhere.
My name is Lamis. I'm a youth worker and a writer. As a youth worker, I work with young people who have been settled in Australia without their family. Some of the young people I work with are orphans. Other young people have left their families behind to migrate here alone. I have spent nearly 10 years in this work, and I have worked with young people from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Sri Lanka, and Iran. To witness the number of children tagged, wounded child, no surviving family cuts deep. It's a tag that speaks to how violently robbed a child is of their family, community, ancestors, and love. In their escape, whether into neighbouring countries or through resettlement programs, these kids will be robbed again of land and language. Resettlement isn't the answer, liberation is. It is to remove the necessity of their escape, to protect their connection to land, culture, and family. We see people refusing to leave, just as Indigenous communities here refuse to leave. What we are witnessing is the exposure of lies, that colonisation is neither benevolent or non-violent. We are witnessing in real time that no one gives up their sacred connection to land and culture without a fight. Because this is a fight rooted in love. 10 years ago, I visited Palestine for the first time. I volunteered with a Palestinian-run organisation in the West Bank that connected visitors to schools and education centres. It was through this organisation that I ended up as a teaching assistant at an all-boys school in Turrbal, a small town near the border with Jordan. And it was at that school I met Jalal. Jalal was the school principal, and we quickly connected over our shared enthusiasm for nurturing young people. At the school, the classes bulged with over 40 kids, loud, boisterous boys, all scrambling to talk to the teacher and to each other. And if you're a teacher, you know how hard it is to manage a school with 40 kids. A class, sorry. They were enthusiastic and curious. Jalal would stroll through the school, checking on students, giving hugs and high fives. He wasn't just a principal, he was a member of his wider community. He knew which kids had fathers in jail, which kids had means, and which kids were struggling. He knew their parents, their histories, and their homes, and he wanted more for the kids in his community. And so he worked for them, and he took time after school to run sports programs, to run community programs. And Jalal loved his land. He organised hiking and camping trips to the edges of the Jordan Valley. He even took us volunteers, folks from Australia, America, and Europe, to show us how beautiful the sunset looked from his favourite hill. But most beloved to Jalal of all was his family. Jalal was a tender father, openly affectionate with his sons and his daughters, and they unashamedly adored him back. And as his wife said to me, he is so loving, and that's why I fell in love with him. Jalal showed me how to let love pour from a broken heart. He'd been a political prisoner, unjustly imprisoned in Israel for 9 years. His best friend had spent 11 years behind bars. Their crime? Throwing rocks as teenagers. Jalal had survived the 1967 war, escaping with lifelong injuries hidden in a well-disguised limp. Everyone here knows the injustices faced by Palestinians. It sounds wild to us, but in Palestine it's everyday life. It's common. No one goes without being touched by the violence of Israeli settler colonialism. Your Palestinian friends are not okay. Your Arab friends are not okay. We are furious at our so-called leaders. We have tried to revolt. We have tried to protest. We have tried to fight back, and we've been crushed at every turn. Syria, crushed. Yemen, crushed. Egypt, crushed. Libya, crushed. Iraq, crushed. And still we rise, and still we fight. And when we rage at the so-called leaders of the Arab world, don't forget to give love to us, to the people who can no longer revolt, who can no longer fight, and who can no longer protest, because a gathering like this would literally end their lives. Don't forget that the Arab diaspora have had a long history of fighting for Palestine while trying to fight for ourselves. We've been betrayed by our leaders, violated by imperialism and colonialism. Many of us live with the ongoing impacts of colonisation in the Middle East. So many of us would rather be in our home countries. We do not settle on stolen lands out of want, but out of need. Homes bombed, economies crushed, homes raided, fathers in prisons, voices, dreams and hopes for a better future mangled under the choking grips of governments, dictators and wars we never asked for. And now we are watching the second Nakba take place. The horrific violence that forces displacement. The violence that has been carried through our oral histories, violence disputed by academics and politicians who don't want to see our suffering and who don't want to see us as human. And when people leave, they'll say that we wanted to leave. They'll turn it back on us and ask, why didn't we stay? They'll sell us refugee status as a humanitarian solution instead of stopping the bombs. Yes. How many times must we be ravaged by war? How many more children? How many more women? How many more of our men lost to murder and PTSD? This is personal. The genocide in Gaza isn't just about the bombs that dropped today. It is about everything that ricochets from the moment it falls. It is a blast radius that spreads through generations. But despite it all, we live, we love, and we fight. Jalal has a quote on his Facebook. Love is man's greatest goal and achievement. We fight because we love. We revolt because we love. We protest because we love. Resistance is love. Revolution is love.
Free, free Palestine!
That was Lamis Hamuda. These reflections are also significant to the strategy that's emerging in these movements, one based on, to paraphrase the Palestinian writer and activist Stephen Slater, an uncompromising solidarity with the dispossessed. This orientation towards liberation for all has also created a stronger skepticism of movements for justice that begin and end with the manufactured colonial borders of the nation-state. This is Dr. Jamal Nabulsi.
For me, I'm deeply sceptical about nation-states in general, and ultimately I think if we are going to address the kind of broader global existential threats like climate change and things, like we ultimately need to dismantle the nation-state system. And I think in many ways, the so-called Israel epitomizes what is wrong with the nation-state. It's a supremacist, exclusionary nation-state that is intent on pushing Palestinians off their land continuously, increasingly stealing their land, draining the land of resources, destroying the environment, and of course murdering the people and destroying the people, and not allowing the true owners of the land to return. So it really, I think, epitomizes what is wrong with the nation-state in general.
You can so easily see how colonialists sitting in London or Paris have drawn lines on a map to divide up people who live together in peace and harmony for centuries and centuries. This is what they do. We cannot look at Palestine as an isolated problem, because it is not. It's happened in Australia. It's happened in the part of the world where I grew up, in Pakistan. When the colonialists were kicked out, this was maybe kind of their revenge. So for me, the only people who can determine what a future for Palestine looks like should and must be Palestinians. What justice looks like should and must be Palestinians. No one.
That was Green Senator Marine Faruqi speaking at an iftar in Magandjin in March 2024. We'll end this episode with a reminder from Black feminist abolitionist organiser Andrea Ritchie, who spoke at the Sisters Inside conference in Magandjin in 2023 and spent many weeks while here attending the Justice for Palestine Magandjin rallies and protests. In this short excerpt from a much longer speech, Andrea emphasises that any attempts to build a politics that aims to free Palestine will necessarily also be contesting other forms of coercion, incarceration and repression, whatever shape they take.
Abolition in practice is free Palestine. 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 Abolition in practice is decolonization. Abolition in practice is land back. Abolition in practice is an end to violence in all its forms, including settler colonialism, imperialism, racial capitalism, and cis heteropatriarchy, and the practices of criminalization that uphold these interlocking systems of oppression. Abolition in practice is decriminalization without exception. That doesn't mean that we don't attend to violence and harm. In fact, as Mariam Kaba and I write in No More Police, A Case for Abolition, the abolitionist movement is led by survivors of multiple forms of violence because we want more and better for ourselves and for each other. As Aaron Miles Cloud, who you briefly saw in yesterday's video, says, everyone cares about someone's safety somewhere, some of the time. Abolitionists care about everyone's safety everywhere, all of the time. Abolition in practice is preventing, interrupting, and healing from violence and harm, and transforming the conditions that make it possible. Criminalization is not a response to violence, it is violence. As Beth Ritchie, my sister in struggle, wrote, and I wrote in The Crisis of Criminalization, criminalization goes beyond the passage and enforcement of criminal laws to the designation of particular groups of people as criminal in service of producing and maintaining systems and relations of power. People like the over 2 million people of Gaza, half of whom are children, and the West Bank. Indigenous people, black people, migrants, disabled people, trans and gender nonconforming people, or protesters, like the 61 people charged with domestic terrorism earlier this week in the United States for resisting the construction of a police training facility in Atlanta that is modeled after one used by the Israeli occupation force, dubbed Little Gaza. Criminalization is a practice of dehumanization that makes genocide possible, that makes prisons possible, that makes borders possible, that makes ripping families apart possible, that makes holding women hostage with no medical care possible, that makes sexual violence by police and prison guards and parole officers possible, including the state-sanctioned sexual violence. I mean, it's all state-sanctioned, but the state-sanctioned sexual violence of strip searches. It's what makes spit hoods possible, that makes chokeholds possible, that normalizes the everyday brutal violence of policing in prisons, that disappears people, as we heard yesterday, that disappears peoples. Criminalization is a practice that makes policing and punishment the default response to every form of conflict, harm, or need, that consumes an ever-growing share of our collective resources, our lands, our loved ones, and our imaginations. That is why Mariam Kaba and I co-founded Interrupting Criminalization, why as black feminist abolitionists, criminalization is the root on which we pull with all of our might, whether it's criminalization of poverty, of prostitution, of parenting, of our mere presence in public spaces, of care, of substances, of self-defense, of our survival. Understanding, exposing, and resisting criminalization through the lens of the experiences of women, queer, and trans people, in other words, free her, illuminates the breadth of criminalizing webs beyond police and prisons, and their reach into every institution we interact with, including our families and communities in what Beth names as the matrix of violence. It illuminates the lies of treatment, not punishment, where the treatment is the punishment, of counselors, not cops, where the counselors are cops, of public health approaches to public safety, where public health institutions have policed our sexual, gender, and reproductive autonomy in deeply racialized, ableist, and imperialist ways for centuries. And it illuminates criminalization as a fundamental breaking of the relationality that Auntie Lila described as essential to life and to resistance. Criminalization is the antithesis of care. And as black feminist scholar Saidiya Hartman put it, care is the antidote to violence.
So, Malak, why do you think it's important that for those of us who are spending a lot of time struggling for justice for Palestine at the moment, why do you think it's important that we also understand the connections between this struggle and these global, broader movements for justice?
It's very easy to realize that all of these struggles are interconnected. Like when we look at the destruction of eucalyptus in Australia, and then I think it was about 40 years ago, Australia sent eucalyptus trees to Israel so they could change the habitat in Palestine. So they are all connected because it's all the same project of steal resources, steal land, dehumanize people to the point where they don't matter because the money you're making out of another person's land is more important. So it really is, my struggle for Palestine is not just my struggle, it's everybody's struggle, and the struggle for reconciliation and the treaty for First Nations people isn't just their struggle, it's my struggle, because how can I live in unceded land and then ask for support for my unceded land? It's they're two sides of the same coin. So of course we have to stand together, because even if our stories are a little bit different, it's still written by the same person.
In the next episode, we'll be looking deeper at the demands for the return of Palestinian homelands and the way that movements for justice for Palestine are connecting to long-standing Indigenous demands for land back and liberation, but also connecting us more directly to the urgent crisis of climate change.
Resistance is justified! Palestine is occupied! Resistance is justified!
We'll end the fourth episode of the Justice for Palestine podcast with a wonderful small reminder from Benil, from Queensland Muslim Incorporated, of the importance of thinking seriously about the forces we're watching unfold in this moment and the lessons we can learn from struggling together.
And they asked us, where are the great thinkers who will liberate Palestine? Where are the Gandhis? Where are the Martin Luther Kings? Where are the Nelson Mandelas? I'm here to say there is a Martin Luther King in each of us. There is a Nelson Mandela in each of us. There is a Gandhi in each of us. And if it becomes necessary, there is a Malcolm X in each of us. And we refuse to give up. We refuse to give up. We refuse to be defeated because there is a Palestinian in each of us. And we don't stop until we see a free Palestine. Today, the world stands with no fear. Our tongues free, our minds liberated, our hearts unchained. Our movement towards justice and liberation is no longer on anybody else's terms. We decide when it began. It did not begin on October 7. It began on 15th of May 1948. It began on 2nd of November 1917.
Always was, always will be. 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 When I say what do we want, you say justice. What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When I ask what do we want, you say land back. What do we want? What do we want? What do we want?
My last thing I would like to say is this world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Justice for Palestine Magandjin podcast,
produced by the Radio Reversal Collective.
Huge thanks to 4ZZZ here in so-called Brisbane for providing the space and resources for us to pull together this series.
If you're interested in amplifying the struggle for justice for Palestine through your own platforms and you'd like to access the Justice for Palestine Magandjin audio archive, please let us know via our Substack, where you'll also find details about how to get involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation right here in Magandjin.